All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. Bienvenue. Welcome to the 2025 CAH conference. I'm so glad you're here with us today. My name is Amanda DeFalco, and I'm the Senior Director of Strategy and People with the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness. I'd like to take a moment before we begin by acknowledging that the conference is on unceded Indigenous lands. The Kanien'kehá:ka, recognized as the custodians of the lands and waters on which we gather today. Tiohtià:ke, which is Montreal, is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations. Today it's home to a diverse population of Indigenous and other people. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future, and our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples from coast to coast to coast. We are going to get started. Before we do, si vous êtes francophone, il y a la translation. Vous êtes bien? Oui, merci. The presentation will be done in English today, but making sure that our French friends have translation devices with them. We will be doing two presentations today, and then there'll be time for Q&A at the end. So I'll be moderating that and making sure that we stay on time today and that you get out in time for the most important part of your day, which is eating. So I'll make sure that we get to that as well. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to welcome our friends from Bright and Early, Trisha and Steph, who will be starting things off. Thank you, Trisha and Steph.
Thank you, Amanda. And hello, everyone. Welcome to the Retention Revolution. We're Bright and Early, and we are a modern HR firm that works with mission-driven organizations across North America. We're here because we know that retention isn't about perks and pay, although they are important. And we're going to go through some practical and very real examples of the actual levers that you can pull for how to address retention from the heart. We're really excited about this, because when working with mission-driven organizations, we see that around 90% of turnover typically involves one common experience. So I'm Steph, my pronouns are she and her. My background is almost entirely in the nonprofit sector. So I come specifically from nonprofit management, where I dabbled in fundraising, project management, and more. Now I focus on the stuff that helps people thrive at work. I also do a fair bit of work in Indigenous inclusion and governance, and I'm Métis, and I'm mom to 2 kiddos. Oh yeah, okay, sorry about that. I can just get right up to the mic. Why don't I just do that again quickly? So we're here from Bright and Early. We're a modern HR firm. We work with mission-driven organizations across North America. And we're excited to chat with you all because we know that retention isn't just about perks and pay, though they are important. And we're gonna go through the actual levers that you can pull for how to address retention at your organizations from the heart. We're very excited about this because in the 300 to 400 or so organizations that we've worked with that are very mission-driven and values-aligned, we see that about 90% of turnover comes from one common experience that we'll get into. And I'm Steph. My pronouns are she and her. My background is almost entirely in the nonprofit sector, but now I focus on the stuff that helps people to thrive at work. I'm also Métis. I do a lot of work in Indigenous inclusion and governance, and I have 2 tiny humans.
Tiny human number 1 over there. And hi, folks. Good morning. First off, thank you so much for being here with us. This is so exciting. My name is Trisha Nyogi. My pronouns are she and her. And I have led compensation and leadership strategies across multiple different industries, so tech, nonprofit, government, and creative agencies for about 10 years now. And I have a background in inclusive design and inclusive research methodologies. And that really helps me design one-for-one custom unique programs to help folks like yourselves build a great place to work. And together, we work at Bright and Early to help teams just like you. So, getting into it.
Use the clicker instead.
Oh, clicker. There we go. A little bit about how we work at Bright and Early. So our work is rooted in these 4 pillars. So first and foremost, our work is driven in data. I don't know why I'm leaning. I could just do this. So when it comes to data-driven, so all of our work is backed by research methodology. So when it comes to your engagement survey, making sure it's backed by actual surveys and one-on-ones and interview versus just feelings. And our compensation work is also backed by market data versus hearsay. And when it comes to designing around values, we make sure we're building policies and processes that are unique to you and based on what you believe in versus contradictory information. When it comes to leading with inclusion, this is incredibly important because even if it's a small part of your team, it's still really valuable, and we want to make sure everyone is feeling safe, and that directly leads to your retention. And then lastly, we design things custom to you, so it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Everyone in this room has a unique way of doing things and being, and we want to make sure we're designing for that. So that is how we work at Bright and Early. And then let's get into some of the nuances we see in retention.
So, I am much shorter. When we think about retention, we're often thinking about perks, pay, policies, and those are often people's first assumptions when people leave. But the truth is, people stay when they feel safe, respected, and heard, even when things get messy, especially when they get messy. Today, we're not going to go through a checklist for perfect leadership because that's not realistic or necessarily real. What we're going to do is we're going to talk through how to lead through messiness, so things like conflict, tension, or where values might be tested. At the end of the day, retention is trust plus clarity and consistency. People stay when they really, really, truly believe that the organization can handle conflict and change with integrity. And you all, as leaders, craft the foundation of your organization. This is your mission, vision, values, processes, policies, all the things that you say you're going to do. You also choose who you hire, but at the end of the day, your workplace culture, your team's engagement really relies on whether you're true to your word and whether you stick to the foundation that you created. People leave when they feel misled or when they are misled.
And when it comes to why messiness matters, messiness is essentially your opportunity to realize that change needs to happen. So the way we frame it is you have your foundation, and when something is messy, when it's feeling like there's tension, there's maybe some conflict, it means that there's a crack in your foundation. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It just means that it's time to fortify a specific area in your foundation. So that could be your values, it could be your mission, your purpose, it could also be your team. So who are you hiring? Who are you working with? It could also be your systems and policies and programs, all small things, right? No problem. But when it comes to messiness, it's about dealing with it head on. So we're noticing that there's tension. How are we going to approach it and work and lead through it? And that's what we're going to get into in today's session and actually give you folks a framework of working through that. So messiness means that it's your opportunity to show your integrity and how you want to lead through that change. And I mean, mess is probably not a surprise to any of you. You folks are probably dealing with mess all the time. So how are you going to lead through that and lead with integrity as well? Surprise, surprise, we think it's important to normalize the mess. So mess is needed, and you're probably thinking to yourselves, okay, we know it's messy, but how do we actually do it? Funding is limited. Funding is getting cut. There's different ideologies happening. How do we get people bonded together and work together? And the thing is, mess is healthy and expected, so it happens constantly. Leadership changes, the ultimate kind of versus productivity versus work-life balance, it happens everywhere, especially for folks in the nonprofit space. The scope of work expanding, so the typical, hey, this is not part of my job description, why am I being asked to do this? There's also the mission expansion, so we're realizing that the mission and scope are expanding for many, many organizations, and how do you lead through that? As well as holding a specific stance. So organizations are being asked to actually name things and hold a stance, and it's uncomfortable. Leaders are coming to us and saying, how do we actually work through this? So as leaders, you will be tested, and it's something to not shy away from, because your team are expecting you to actually move through this and lead through this. They are looking up to you to lead through the mess. And the thing about leadership is that you are held to a higher standard. That's common, that's expected, and your team are looking up to you. And the hope is that you folks are kind of able to bring them along in that change, even though it's incredibly challenging. But the hope is that you can walk away with the framework to help you do that. And when it comes to cultures, culture and retentions fail when leaders fail to lead with accountability. So this is really the key takeaway. And it's not going to be easy. Accountability means taking the hard stance, drawing the hard line, saying the thing no one wants to say. That's challenging, it's difficult, it might feel impossible, but that's the thing that directly leads to retention. So there's one thing you're going to take away from this. It's leading with accountability, leading with integrity, and doing the hard thing. So easy, right?
So as we said earlier, there's one common experience in the majority of turnover that we see with mission-driven organizations. And it's kind of this question of like what you do with the mess directly correlates to how well you can retain your staff. So a lot of organizations say that we're people first, but those things are really tested when conflict touches things like politics, religion, identity, or where it causes harm. Where we see organizations with what we call a cracked foundation, so that might be gaps or inaccuracies in your processes, your values, your mission, all those things that you have on paper, it means that change is needed, and that's okay, and that's not a bad thing. For many organizations, they might have amazing values on paper, but they might not necessarily be real. So we're going to talk through a few examples. And one of those examples is there's an organization that we know and that we've worked with for quite some time that's undergone really, really big change in the last 4 or 5 years. New leadership, new board, new management, new expectations, expanded expectations. And they wrote some really incredible values. They wrote out some incredible structures, some incredible vision statements kind of for everything that they were trying to do, but they haven't followed them consistently. And 2 teams at that organization have leaders that have really insulated the team from a lot of the change and a lot of those challenges, but the other 2 teams don't. And those 2 teams in particular have experienced, now at this point, 4 or 5 years in, 95% turnover 3 times. 3 times. But the processes, the misalignment, the gaps haven't been addressed. So from my perspective, those challenges are going to keep happening. We're going to get into a little bit more about that organization later. But when we want to focus on retention, what we're really trying to do is change with integrity. So this means shaking up that foundation. That could include, who's on your team. That might include how do you make decisions? Who do you partner with? Where do you accept funding from? No one's exempt from change, including leadership. So for example, another organization that we'll also touch on later had almost the same challenges as our first example here, but they handled it completely differently. Really beginning with self-reflection and accountability at the top. And we'll continue kind of talking through how that approach of leading with integrity versus sort of waffling over some of the changes that were needed led to very different outcomes at these 2 organizations.
Okay, so now we're going to get practical in terms of, let's talk about some principles to help you folks lead through that change. So we have a framework, and I will say it's not perfectly linear, such as life, but it's a general framework to help you folks parse through the change that needs to happen, the mess, and kind of guide you through that. So first, as with everything, it starts with building that understanding. So in our work, as I mentioned, we work with a lot of data. So when it comes to building that understanding, we like to use a variety of different sources. So for us, it's your engagement survey and the results from that survey, one-on-one. So whether that's interviews with your team members, whether that's listening sessions, whether that's group sessions, however it might be, gathering both quantitative and qualitative feedback. That's also feedback from your leadership team. That's feedback from your cultural advocators, as well as your cultural detractors. We need to hear from everybody. And it's also working with external partners. So perhaps you're working with some consultants. What are they saying? What's the sentiments that they're gathering? Also some unbiased external support. And then lastly, a thing that Bright and Early does is we always look at your values. So what do you have on paper? Your actual values, your mission, your vision, as well as your policies and your processes. And then we fact check it. Are you actually doing the thing you say you're doing? Are you doing the thing that's written down on paper? And if not, that's okay, but it means that we've highlighted a gap or a crack in your foundation. So that's step 1 in understanding. So really robust, kind of getting into the meat of it and seeing what's going on under the hood. Then we get into accountability. There we go. So with accountability, no one wants to believe that they've harmed someone, right? It's usually not intentional, but it happens, and harm happens all the time, even if it's unintentional. So when it comes to accountability, the thing is, as leaders, you have to take ownership for the thing that happened, even though you're not the one that did it. That's the ultimate leadership responsibility, right? So with accountability, if it's becoming something difficult to do, if you're noticing that, it's being really challenging to actually hold that ownership, once again, there's a crack in your foundation. If it's a person, I will say this is the most challenging thing, because this could mean your co-leader, can mean your best employee, the person that's bringing in the most fundraising, the most partnerships. It's your first employee, someone you don't want to part with. If those people are the ones that are causing cracks in your foundation, it's important to have accountability over that. It doesn't mean you say goodbye, but it means you're having the conversation and being really real with what's happening. Once again, addressing that crack. Then we get into rebuild. So this is how your structure actually works. So your processes, your policies, your values, your mission, everything that's written in paper, we evaluate that. So when it comes to rebuild, it could also mean you're redoing your values. Maybe you are redesigning your processes, your policies. You're now putting on paper the commitments you want to make now that you've held on to accountability. And then lastly, we get into repair. So with repair, this is the most fragile part of this entire process because it really requires high trust. What we've done for the first 3 steps is essentially unearthing everything. So now that your team is essentially raw, they're like, okay, what are you gonna do about this now? And that's where we get into repair. The thing about repair and rebuild is that it's not just 1 to 2 steps. It's not 1 step here, 1 step there. It's a cycle. And it ebbs and flows, and we're talking about mess, it's also very messy. So you might think, hey, we've gone through the understanding, did the accountability piece, we're starting to maybe build new processes, we're codifying our policies, we're ready to repair. And then we realize, oh, we've missed a voice, or oh, we actually didn't consider this 1 thing, or 2 things, or 5 things, and we have to go back to rebuilding and probably take accountability again and do the thing over again. So it gives you a picture of it's not necessarily seamless or linear, and it takes time. That's the big piece. It takes a lot of time to do it, but for the teams that do take the time and invest in that, they're able to build that fortified structure. So we've seen it done. It can happen. That is a promise, but you do have to be ready and willing to do the work that it takes, which is time and taking that accountability and ownership.
Okay, so now that you've seen the process, let's revisit our 2 lovely organizations from earlier and see how it played out for them. Alrighty. Okay, so we have Organization 1 and Organization 2. Both of these organizations have a really great mission alignment to do good in the world. I'm leaving it intentionally vague here, specifically in Canada, but they operate in slightly different ways. But they both have similar values and very similar processes on paper. And as I mentioned, they both recently had their values and leadership tested. But where things were tested was team members really pushed the organizations to have a stance on a global conflict. But the similarities end there. So they approach the situation and the challenge in completely different ways, and has led to completely different outcomes. So as I mentioned, Organization 1 kind of avoided the conversation. They told people one-on-one that it was inappropriate to bring things up during workplace settings. They ended conversations when people highlighted the organization's values and outlined that it felt misaligned. They actually retaliated when people pointed out that it felt like a double standard. And they did no work to rebuild their foundation or to correct where things were on paper that they weren't actually living up to. They also did no work to repair trust or to understand where the team was coming from. So as I mentioned, there were the 2 teams that had 95% turnover 3 times over, but on average, kind of each time an instance happened, that led to around 30% exits each time. They also had a little bit of a PR nightmare with newspaper articles written about various instances here. Our other example actually came really, really, really close to trying to gloss things over. They tried to shut down conversations for a while. They waffled a little bit. It felt hard. They didn't know what process they wanted to take. They also didn't know what they were willing to accept at work. And in some instances, inaction felt easier, even without that recognition that it could cause harm and challenges. They wanted everyone to feel comfortable, so they didn't want to address things in a way that might feel too direct. But then it went too far. And instead of responding with anger or retaliation, they actually wound up working incredibly, incredibly hard to understand where things went wrong. They worked so hard to understand how important the situation was and the handling of the situation was to the team. So when we're talking about accountability, in this particular instance, the executive director flew to another city to meet face-to-face and take some of those impacted team members out for very, very lengthy walks, really looking to understand and looking to take ownership. Then they backed it up with action. So they changed the processes that they could. They were radically transparent with what they were changing and why. So they changed things like their procurement processes, they adjusted their management structure, they changed how their DEI committee engaged with the rest of the organization and influenced and led a lot of decision making. They also went and created more clarity where they could. So, that included like some new policies, some updated processes, so that if there was a process that they were following in real life, it was the actual one that was documented. So we're not saying one thing and doing another. And then they backed it up with check-ins, support, training for a lot of the management team as well. So this wasn't easy. This was a lot of work over a very, very lengthy period of time, and it was really, really hard for them. But where it landed is that at this time now, their culture is actually stronger than ever. The team does feel very supported at work. That's been reflected through engagement surveys, and that's also been reflected through their output and kind of their progress towards their goals. The team that went through this incredibly challenging experience together, that saw leaders and saw the organization own it with extreme accountability, they saw the organization hear them out, they saw the organization change what they could and create clarity where they couldn't, and it worked.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about facing resistance and misalignment, because it will happen. It's not always going to go perfectly. Just because we presented a framework doesn't mean that, oh, now it's going to work great and everything is fine. Absolutely not. You will 100% face resistance and misalignments, and not everyone is going to be brought along, and not everyone wants to be brought along. So this is testing leadership capabilities and testing the foundation of your organization. You're likely going to have resistance because change is difficult and different, and not everyone is excited by that change. The hope is that we are, and retaining the right people. When we're talking about retention, it's not necessarily about retaining 100%, but it's about retaining the people that will help you get to the next step, right? And building the right and fair and equitable processes, being transparent and clear so that everyone can be brought along. But when we can manage through misalignment, we're able to actually lead through change and lead with that integrity. So it's important to talk about why misalignment happens. So resistance itself comes from lack of clarity. We didn't acknowledge previous harm. So this is a big one we see a lot of organizations make. For example, in a lot of nonprofits, you're getting a new CEO maybe every 3 to 5 years. And that new CEO comes in and is really, really excited for that change. But if we didn't acknowledge the past, whether the previous leadership team was well loved, or there was a lot of conflict with the previous leadership team, when that goes unaddressed and unacknowledged, the team is not bought in and they are not excited for that change. Also, we never enforced changes on things on paper. So for example, a lot of verbal things happen, like we agree to do this, everything you're saying makes sense, yes, we're gonna put that in action. Where's the policy? Where's the compliance? Not to put our HR hat on here, but it is actually really important, and it's important to get it on paper. And then also we introduced or reinforced a structure that is challenging or it is a first time. So for example, any new expectation does require bringing the team along. So that change management, even if it's a small policy or a new way of working hours, those are all really important and adds to that foundation that you're creating and making sure the team is aware and understands why that change is happening, how it's going to impact them, and ultimately how it's going to improve their lives. And then lastly, as leaders, how you work through that resistance will directly impact your employee retention. So as leaders, exploring where that resistance is coming from, so that understanding, holding space for nuance and disagreement. This is really important. Oftentimes we hear people say, well, not everyone's going to agree, and how it's impossible to get everyone to agree. And that's true. It's not necessarily about bringing everybody along. We all have different beliefs. We all have different ways of being. However, it's about getting everyone to agree on the next step. How are we going to move forward? If everyone can agree on moving forward together, even with their differences in beliefs, then you're able to lead through change and you're able to guide your team forward. And then lastly, taking that time and investment to show care. So once again, holding space doesn't mean convincing everyone, but it means that, hey, we're here together, we're trying to do this thing. If you agree with this, here's how we're going to move forward on it. And that is that leadership aspect.
So to kind of summarize some of those highlights, resolution is not quick or easy. We need to hold space to have conversations that might be uncomfortable. We need to acknowledge that intent and impact are two different things. There could be multiple truths. We need to still be able to get to a particular endpoint where we can hold space for multiple truths. Regardless of the intent, the impact can still be harmful. So we need to take accountability for that harm, and we need to move towards rebuilding and repair. So back to our lovely examples. This was really hard for our second organization, the organization that handled things very well. It was still hard. It wasn't quick, it wasn't easy. It was difficult, it was emotional, and it took an extreme amount of accountability. They really felt that they had created this amazing, inclusive, supportive work environment where they were doing good in the world. And to hear that not everyone experienced their leadership or the organization in that way, that some folks felt harmed, was really difficult for them. It took time for them to reconcile that misalignment between intent and impact, to understand that despite having best intentions, because don't we all, it wasn't landing the way that they hoped. But by finding ways and opportunities for them to hold space for multiple truths, for them to really hear people out and understand that this was true. This is their real experience, and we need to find a way to acknowledge that. And then for them to take accountability and ownership over that, that's how they got to kind of that good stuff, right? Where things are now feeling pretty solid, the team is feeling engaged, heard, and cared for. But it was a really, really iterative process, and it's still not done. That's going to keep happening. That's going to keep going on. There's going to be ongoing conversations, and that's great. That's good. So, hopefully now you have seen how a similar process can be applied through a whole range of the circumstances, like change, needing to take accountability, a challenge, a conflict, leading through resistance. And hopefully you also understand how that plays into retention. If you only take a few things away from today, let it be these points. So number one, let's just normalize the mess. This kind of stuff happens all the time. It's not the end of the world. It's just a sign that you need to revisit the foundation of your organization and make sure that what you say you're going to do is what you actually do. It's a sign to reevaluate things. And you can start doing that by working to understand what happened, understand what people's experiences are, and understand where the gaps are within your organization. Then take accountability for it. So name it, own it, be real about it, and accept that a degree of ownership is required. Then, after understanding and accountability, you can work towards repairing and rebuilding. So that comes through fixing the foundation, so fixing the things that you have on paper, making sure that they are real, and then actually doing them. And then last but not least, hold some space for conflict and tension. It's going to keep happening. It's a test of leadership. It's a test of the organization. It's normal. And remember that clarity is kindness. We say it all the time at Bright and Early. So clarity is kindness, and clarity is kind of that anchor to your retention. Thank you. So thank you, everyone. This is one of our favorite topics. It's so meaningful, it's so valuable, and it's something that I hope we can all view as iterative. We know exactly how valuable your team is to your mission, and we know how crucial retention is to supporting your team, and honestly, to accomplishing the work that you're all trying to do. Hopefully this has given a few tactical steps, and hopefully we can avoid some of the challenges that impact so many organizations. There'll be questions at the very end, but we'll pass it over to our lovely co-presenters and moderator.
All right, thank you so much, Trisha and Steph from Bright and Early. So now that we've talked about concept from sort of that HR perspective, we're going to land things into the sector and real life practices. And I'm going to invite our friends from End Homelessness St. John up to tell you what this looks like in an actual organization working to end homelessness. So thanks, Doug and Megan. Please come up.
That was a great presentation. Really, I took a lot from that. So hopefully we'll live up to some of the frameworks that you've shared with us. So my name is Doug Poston. I serve as the executive director with End Homelessness St. John's. My pronouns are he, him, and I'll turn it over to Megan to introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Megan Murphy. I'm the manager of finance and administration at End Homelessness St. John's. My pronouns are she, her. I've worked at End Homelessness for about 5 years now, but I have worked in community in a combination of frontline and nonprofit work for 13 years. And I know you're all thinking, Megan, 13 years, you look so young. Your spirit still seems intact. I appreciate that, thank you so much. But I came from a history of nonprofit work where I was doing frontline work for a while, so I know what it feels like to be a young person really committed to the mission of your organization, facing challenges with burnout, and I also know what it feels like to be on the other side of it here at Homelessness St. John's. So I have a real passion for retention and what this looks like in our sector. So thank you, and I'm excited to go through what we learned from our own staff at Homelessness.
Yes. I also have been in the sector for a number of years, a little bit more than 13, and I think I look it. So thanks for making me have to acknowledge that I'm old. And anyways, but yeah, I've been working with End Homelessness St. John's for 6 years now, and before that, I worked in Ottawa in social services and frontline work. So it's been an interesting combination of experiences, and I'll tell you a bit about our organization. So we are a system planning organization. I don't know if that resonates with folks here. It's hard to describe, but we essentially are a purpose-built nonprofit organization focused on system coordination, data-driven decision-making around our community's ability to end homelessness. So we are responsible for reaching home, the community entity status within St. John's. And so we deliver coordinated access, we deliver on HIFIS, and managing the by name list in our community. And we run a number of other programs that kind of fill system level gaps. So when the governments have created these gaps, we kind of fill in and support our community partners and their clients. So our role, I mentioned a bit about it, the community entity and system planning organization. And so we're really intentional about having a community-wide plan around ending homelessness in our community that's really deeply rooted in engagement with people with lived experience, but also community partners doing the frontline and hard work, the messiness, but also with folks in government as well. And we're really intentional about governance, right? We have a board of directors, but we also have a community advisory board, and we want to make space for everybody in the community, whether you're frontline work or at the executive level, to have a role in influencing the homeless serving system in our community. So we were thinking about employee retention from a bit of a different perspective. As the system planning entity, we've noticed a lot of our frontline serving agencies having a lot of turnover, and the challenges related to turnover can be pretty significant, right? So one of the things that we try to emphasize, especially to decision makers in government, that increasingly frontline work is really first responder work, and we're not equipping our organizations and their staff to be supported in a way that recognizes the immense amount of challenges that presents. And I'm sure that's nothing new for you folks working in the community, but I think it's lost a lot of times in decision makers that look at frontline work as, not as important and as critical, even though they're often the first responders to crises, especially in the homeless serving sector. So when we're seeing, a lot of turnover in our community, we're questioning, why are we being asked to do more with less. Obviously, that's a challenge. We're naturally a compassionate sector in organizations, and we want to do the best we can to support folks in front of us. But sometimes it's hard to lift our heads up to recognize, how do we do this in a more sustainable way so that folks are able to support their staff, especially the frontline staff, doing that really hard work. And for me, as I think about this, not just for our community in St. John's and around the province of Newfoundland and Labrador, but I think around the country, like workforce development and sustainability is so critical. And if we're churning through younger staff and younger people entering the sector, and they're not seeing an opportunity to progress, or they're not feeling the supports, and they move on to other sectors or other jobs, what does that mean for the sector? Not just in the short term and being able to deliver the services, but what does it mean for the leadership gap that we can see emerging 10, 15, 20 years from now? What is it going to look like for the sector when we can't bring people up and through and let them flourish as future leaders in their own organizations and in their own community? So I worry about that from that sort of bigger picture item. And I think just by virtue of our role as a system planning entity, we see that at a community level. And so we think about that, and we talk a lot about that as a team. And we talk about our role and what accountability do we play in supporting our community to have equity built into our systems so that folks who are doing the hard work have the opportunities to really feel supported at their organizations, but as a community doing the hard work together. And so those are things that we think about in terms of the messiness in our own organization, the messiness in and I'm using your terms because I think it really resonates, the messiness within the work, right? And if we're not working together, how do we get the work done when it seems almost impossible every single day, right? So we thought about employee retention, again, from a system level, but also at an internal level. And I'll turn it over to Megan and to talk a bit about the retention aspects of our work and why we were looking at it and why we were interested in it as well.
Thank you. Yeah, so how does EHSJ retain staff? So like Doug mentioned, we didn't actually have a retention strategy on paper, but as time went on, we realized that you folks are still here. Why? Just from our perspective, we had, I think, when we were a fairly new organization. We've been active for about 5 years now as our own separate nonprofit. And in those 5 years, we've hired over 44 salaried staff. And of those 44 in the 5 years, we've only had 7 folks leave the organization, 4 of which actually stayed in the sector. So we only really did lose 3 people who moved on to something different. And I think that's really amazing. So we were kind of wondering, if we don't have a strategy in paper, then what is it that's keeping folks here? And we want to hear from our staff. What is it about Homelessness St. John's that is keeping you here? So we constructed a survey kind of in 2 parts. The first part, which I'll go through, is just basically topics around, any workplace that would have any of these things like compensation, benefits, leave packages. This will be applicable to pretty much any workplace, and those were kind of please rate how important it is on a scale of very important to not at all important for your retention here. And then I think what we wanted then is to kind of get a sense of how you perceive the culture here and how important is that to you and what does that look like and feel like for you. So the second set of questions was a little bit more open-ended, exploring a little bit more of what you perceive the culture at Homelessness St. John's to be, and is that important to you, and what is it that builds that culture for you. And when I was thinking about constructing this presentation, I really wanted folks to come away from this with a sense of you can bring it back to your own agencies. We're all in the same boat in the housing and homelessness sector. So I think we're in a unique position to kind of take our amazing employees who have been in the community. Some of them came into the community with homelessness. Some of us have been here for 15, 20 years. So to kind of get all of their expertise as to, what is it that they feel is important to have present in the sector. So all of these questions are going to be questions that you folks could probably easily ask your own staff, and I'll go through some of the more straight ones that we talked about with regards to the very important to not important at all. So like I mentioned, I'll go through these with you folks. So the first couple slides are on compensation and benefits. So, your typical ones that you would expect to see: importance of pay scale, importance of access to group health benefits. Of the 24 respondents that we had, most people said pay was very important, somewhat important. And then access to benefits was even stronger. We had over half folks say that it was very important to them, to somewhat important. Continuing on with compensation and benefits, we looked at things like the importance of leave with regards to retention and the importance of schedule flexibility. So with regards to leave, we're talking about things like vacation time, sick time, family time, personal leave. So we see that, in a sector like ours, especially where folks are doing frontline work, having that flexibility and that ability, I guess, to take time for yourself and have a better work-life balance was really quite important. And I'm sure a lot of this wouldn't be that surprising to folks here in this room. The importance of professional development opportunities was also an interesting one. That was a little bit more of a spread, but still seems to be quite important. And I think, having these conversations with our employees to say, come to us if you have any ideas or goals for your own professional development. We always keep that open for folks to have that conversation. These ones are a little bit more on organizational culture. So we looked at the importance of feeling connected to the team. That was a pretty strongly important one there. And then importance of team building events. This was a little bit of a surprise to me because I put so much effort into the team building, and it turns out people aren't that into it, but maybe they just don't know that they're getting the benefits that they are from it, but anyway. Organizational culture still, importance of recognition and feedback, and importance of open communication with supervisor. These were both highly important, very validating for me because I think I've had one review in about 5 years, Doug, so yeah, turns out that it is important after all. Importance of open communication with supervisor was probably our strongest importance. And we do that a lot at Homelessness St. John's, and it's not just even your direct supervisor. We all kind of have our doors open for anybody who's not just necessarily on our team, but in any of the areas of our organization. We're kind of always working together. And organizational values, not a surprise to most people here that alignment with the organization's purpose, values, goals is very important, especially in this sector. We're attracting folks who have high levels of empathy, caring, so they need to feel really connected to the mission of the organization. So yeah, as a quick summary to some of that, what we kind of discovered is some of the stronger things that identified were as more important were things like schedule flexibility, feeling connected to the team, communication with your supervisor, very important. Team building events, recognition and feedback, a little bit more varied. And then we were kind of expecting to see, I think, even a stronger lean in the pay scale, but that was, I think, a little bit more balanced. So that was kind of what we got out of some of the just straight data collection questions. And I'll pass it back over to Doug now to kind of go through some of the more open-ended questions that we had.
That review's coming, Megan. You're doing a great job. You're doing a great job. Yeah, so just to build on a bit of the conversation that Megan had, we were there's a series of questions that you could easily adapt into your own organization, but then there's also a series of questions that we felt were, what do organizational values and culture, what does that actually mean? It's really hard to describe. So some of the questions, I'll run through some of the questions and some of the responses, and I know it might be difficult, especially for folks in the back on the other side of the room, to read, but I'll try to highlight a couple of the things. And I did break my own rule, which is I put a lot of text on a slide, but I think it was important. So one of the questions that we asked our staff was, if you had to describe our workplace culture in one or two sentences to someone at a dinner party, what would you say? Because I don't really go to many dinner parties, but if I had to describe what we do, I say system planning organization. People just like look at me like, what are you talking about? But what was really important for us to understand was what do our staff think about the workplace, and if they had to describe the organization, how would they describe it? Not just the work that they do, but the purpose and values that they have. So some of the things that we were really interested in looking at was, the idea of caring for each other and supporting each other. Like Megan said, people come into this sector, with that compassion and empathy. But what was really unique, and I should also make sure I specify this for our team, because we do such different work, we have a very multidisciplinary team. So we have data analysts, we have social workers, we have, MBAs and public administrative backgrounds. We're coming at it from a very different expertise and experience, but often coming from the same values. And I think that's really important. I really like seeing the amazing, very supportive and attentive to the staff needs, concerns, and safety. That's an important thing, that people feel safe in the workplace. And it's something that often is the sign of a toxic work culture, is when that's not there. So building on the workplace culture, if you had to describe our workplace culture at a dinner party, here's a couple of more comments. So open and supportive, which helps with the intensity of the work. It's not lost on us as an organization. The work is really intense. The pressures, whether it's a frontline staff or a supervisor trying to get outcomes and support their teams, whether it's political and media pressure, and this sector has been incredibly hit with political and media pressure over the years. So even for leaders and senior leaders in organizations, how do you show care and support for each other? The next question we asked was, to what degree does the workplace culture influence you staying at and Homelessness St. John's as an employee, if it's an influence at all? And the larger quote there in the bottom left bottom right, sorry, really was fascinating for me, because I feel like I know who wrote that. But it was really interesting because we talk about culture, but how do you practice culture, especially when people come into a new environment or they're trying to adjust to a new environment? And we went through a significant rapid growth over the last year and a half, where our provincial government had leased a hotel, and we took it on as a transition housing initiative, but we were very intentional about building it through community, so that it wasn't just like another housing initiative in our work. So we doubled our staff, more than tripled our staff in about 6 months. And so we've got one side of the organization who's been there for a long period of time, espousing workplace culture. But if people are coming from places where maybe they didn't feel safe or supported, like, you can say culture, but then how do you show up? Like, how do you practice it? So I really like that the idea here, where the assumption that a new employee can just accept it as culture and work within it is hard at times, because how can you build trust so fast, right? So it's consistently showing up, it's consistently giving feedback, it's working through the messiness of it, like you folks were saying. It's also recognizing, we say this a lot in our organization, conflict is good. Conflict can be really good when it's dealt with constructively, right? There's nothing that we can't do together if we're on the same page, working towards the same goals. And so we have to work through conflict. So how do you do that in a short period of time and build that out, right? So that was a really important one to reflect on for me, because it is hard for new staff to just come in and people talk about culture. More of the same questions, safe and confiding with coworkers, having open door policies at all levels. That's really important for us. I would really like the one quote here: you spend 35 to 40% of your life at work. If the people around you are supportive, that makes an impact. It's one of those things, that does make a difference in a person's work life and overall life, and the satisfaction that they get from that. Thinking more about culture here, what is important for you to continue working in the sector, the housing and homeless serving sector in Newfoundland and Labrador? And, we saw answers here that were really reflective of the organization's mission. But what was really interesting is to see, so we're seeing themes around our mission, like system level change and wanting to be a part of that and working towards that. But then how do you stay in that when the work is daunting. And systems work is very incremental, right? Like you don't get wins easily and you don't get them often. So it was really helpful to see how staff are conceptualizing that in their workplace and in their day-to-day. So, knowing that we're a supportive organization is one thing, but also thinking about, how do you make sure that folks see themselves in that work on a day-to-day, even when it's not always clear. And then the last part of that quote there that I think is really interesting is, ultimately, if I were to consider leaving, compensation would likely be the primary factor. Mm-hmm. And I think that's reflective of a sector that's kind of being left behind. Like I was mentioning earlier, like we don't value the sector in the way that we value other work. And that's a real problem. It perpetuates an enormous amount of inequities in our system, and it creates burnout across the system level. And again, thinking about this at a broader scale, workforce development is the key to our sector being sustainable, and having great leadership in the sector is only going to happen if we're focused in on those bigger pieces around compensation, benefits, but also building safe organizations to work in. Just continuing on with that same question, the work is hard. It's important to have people who care about you as a whole person so you can keep going. And that's one of those things that I see, like just walking around the halls in our office. Like people care. They care about you. Something's going on. They say, well, how are you, right? Like, it's not about what the issue is. It's like, how are you? And that takes a long time to build, right? You don't just walk into it overnight. And I think that's a bit of the challenge that we were trying to identify around values. Like, what are our values? We know what our mission is. We know our North Star. What are our values, right? So work-life balance, fair pay, those are all things that we're all striving to do. So this was, again, helpful for us to better understand what does culture mean in a way that those sort of surveys, the results of the survey that Megan was describing, we can see it, but how do we feel it? So I'll turn it over to Megan, and yes.
Thank you. Yeah, so I just have a quick video to show you folks. I think it should resonate with a lot of you. It's a video, maybe some of you have seen it before. Nicole Daniels is her name. She's an actor, writer, and social media content creator based in LA. So she does a series of videos where she parodies Nonprofit Boss. And in this video, she tackles retention. And I think it just really kind of summarizes what we're trying to get at with regards to how the mission is not the be-all and end-all when it comes to retention in a nonprofit environment. So bear with me while I try to figure out how to get this up.
How's it going? I wanted to just follow up with you because I received your proposal for retention and raising retention rates. And I just wanted to say we have a different motto here, right? And so I'm gonna let you in on that. And that's retention is overrated. I think there's this idea of, if you stay with an organization, if you have employees who stay, that maybe indicate some kind of success or happiness. And I think what makes us really unique as a nonprofit is that we really like people coming and going, and that kind of flow and openness is actually what helps us work well and better and give opportunities for more people who are saying like, hey, I want to do mission aligned work, right? Where can I find an opportunity for that as a nonprofit? And it's like, hey, if it doesn't work out in a couple of months, whether it's you feel like, I want to make some more money or something like that, that's okay, because we know that the mission sorts. The mission finds who's really here, who really wants, and we're so happy you've been here as long as you have, right? And we try to really show that with respect. And, well, here's the thing about raises and title changes is that it's a lot of talk and doesn't really make a difference, no work, right? That I could say right now, you're the director if I wanted to, but I don't think you would feel more connected to the mission just because I said that. I don't think you would feel more connected to the mission just because I gave you a raise, and that's what it's about, right? That's why we're here. That's why we're doing this thing called nonprofit work, right? So I hear you. I hear this desire for retention, but I'm gonna just say, like, maybe not right now. Like, let's focus on other things. Let's focus on the mission. Let's focus on these awesome communities. We have Pride Month. Hello, you know how much I love Pride Month coming up, and let's put our attention. Would you like salad? Okay. Let's put our attention there and worry about retention down the road. Attention on the mission, retention down the road.
So yeah, I found that very relatable as somebody who has worked in a frontline nonprofit, and I'm sure a lot of you do too. So yeah, I think what we were trying to get across here is that it's more than just about the mission, and to kind of summarize what we're getting back from our employees who share their thoughts with us. The mission obviously is an essential part of attracting and retaining employees, but it's not enough to ensure retention alone. We have a really strong foundation with our values. So for End Homelessness St. John's, we focus on obviously housing first, collaboration, confidentiality, being solutions focused, and integrity. So everybody on our team, when they come in, they know that those are our values, but it's really important to kind of emulate those day to day for our entire team. And then really what creates the culture is the day-to-day enforcement of those values. So when surveyed, our staff linked our culture to how the workplace really makes them feel. It's the consistent integration of our values and how we treat each other and ensuring everyone feels supported, respected, and connected. I'm sure a lot of you are probably thinking about how can I do this in my own teams. It's not one size fits all, but from our perspective, we, like Doug has talked about, we really sort of pride ourselves on attending to the person first and then the issue after. So we're always attracting folks into the sector of care and empathy, but we need to give that back to them. So we also ensure that there's a lot of trust being built within the team with a lot of opportunities to kind of work in the multidisciplinary areas that we have. And honestly, I think for me, it's just the ability to kind of confidently confide in and challenge each other, and knowing that that's not necessarily going to be something that takes away from your team, it's something that's going to build you up. So that is it for me today. I just want to say thank you, everybody, for being here with us. Thank you to Doug. Thank you so much. Thank you. I don't often have 100 people let me butter up my boss, so I appreciate the round of applause for him. Thank you so much.
We'll all be your peer reviewers.
Thank you.
Short. Thank you so very much for your time and attention and sharing your experiences. There was a lot of healing that I was doing as I was hearing a lot of the things being shared, and I'm sure for many of us as well. Now is the time for Q&A. Before I dig in, one of the interesting concepts that I heard around compensation, and this is something that the CAH as well has grown exponentially in the last 6 months in particular, but really over the last year. We designed a compensation policy. Believe it or not, we didn't have one before. And the first place we started was with philosophy. What is our philosophy around compensation in this sector? Really important conversation to have. Non-negotiable for us is we will pay within the market starting at 80%, and we'll go up to 100. Non-stop, non-negotiable, because we believe in the quality of the work. We believe in value and equitable pay and fair pay for the work that we do. This is not a sector of doing good just out of the goodness of your heart. You have skill. Your teams have skill. And that's something I think that we need to continue to advocate for and demand. Whereas we are a human service sector, just like education, just like health, just like everybody else. And so we should be treated and treating our staff that way as well. All right, so we have some time for Q&A. If you have a question, I'm just going to ask if you could just walk up to the mic in the room. The reason being is because for our Francophone friends, that's how we'll receive translation. And so if you could just use the mic, that would be very much appreciated. So if you have a question, feel free to just make your way to the mic and get in line if you'd like. Don't be shy. Lots of great conversation, I'm sure, to be had.
And if needed, you can raise your hand, and I'm sure someone can bring the mic to you.
Hi, I just had a question. Megan, you made a comment, and this question's for everybody, but you made a comment about person first, issue after. And that's something that like we really focus on in our workplace. But I'm wondering if anybody has some thoughts around how you work to balance the impact of what's going on with individual staff that we're like our staff are incredibly honest with us to a fault. It makes it really hard to address challenges in the workplace, but especially when those challenges are impacting other members of the team, and how do you balance the needs of the whole team while really honoring individual staff experiences?
Right. Yeah, so just so I'm clear, you mean like if you are sharing your experience with the other staff, you don't want to weigh them down? Is that kind of what you're getting at?
No, if an individual, so like I'm an executive director, so an
Yeah.
individual staff is letting me know what's going on in their life that's impacting their performance or their ability to show up meaningfully at work. And I want to honor that experience, but also recognizing that maybe their inability to show up appropriately at work in specific circumstances are impacting other members of the
Right.
team
Understood.
while honoring their confidentiality, which really often isn't a factor because we talk too much. But, you know, recognizing that it still impacts other team members, and how do you balance those two really important things?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think something that we obviously all struggle with. I think for us, what we really practice is having somebody like on your team who you know that is like, you know, if it's your direct supervisor, you can go to them and share your experiences with them. And then I think, you know, I've been lucky enough to work with Doug where if he knows that I'm struggling with something, then he's working with me to support me in the best way that he can, so it's not impacting the team as much as a whole, but then also helping me identify where some of my, or, you know, if some of my issues are coming up where it's like, you know, Megan, you doesn't have the capacity for this right now, so let's explore maybe who could have the capacity for this right now on the team. And we are really fortunate in that we have a group of people who are willing to kind of step up and do that because we've done the work around building the trust with them. That's my own personal experience, but I know that it really has been an issue with some of our teams who work more closely together, especially on the front line of things where, you know, if Sarah doesn't come to work tomorrow, then, you know, Jennifer is going to have to do double of her workload. So what we do is I think the management at the organization is very careful to make sure that if there's to predict any of those shortcomings and kind of try to spread it between themselves and the rest of the team. I don't know if you have any thoughts with how we tackle that.
Yeah, I mean, we you know, I appreciate you bringing that up, and especially as an ED because you're balancing risk and you're balancing the needs of the whole team, and you know, sometimes it's hard to think about the person when you're just like in the back of your mind running through the risks of something. That's why Megan is so great, and because you're balancing so many competing objectives. So it's really difficult. I appreciate that sort of tension. Ultimately, people still have to be accountable. So when I talk about like my leadership approach with the team, it's about servant leadership. And, you know, I've gone into depths about what that means to me, but it's still funny that people think it's soft leadership and not servant leadership. And it doesn't mean you're not accountable. And I think the piece around accountability, especially what we were hearing earlier, you're accountable to your team, you know, and I think that's, and if it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for you. That's okay too, but we want people to feel like they're supported, and when you feel supported, I generally think people are more accountable. And if we live and breathe it in the management, then it's really important for the staff to believe that as well. I don't know if that helps or not.
I'll just add maybe as well. So one of the things that's a bit unique about Bright and Early is we work with a lot of different organizations. So that means we get to see how a lot of things play out in different ways. So one of the things like that's so common and so frequent, and we all want to support people in the absolute best way that we can. Where I would also suggest is that you want to make sure that you're supporting people equitably in ways that your organization can sustain. So we need to, work to understand what does the person need, how can we support or accommodate them, and what's reasonable for our organization. And I would encourage everyone to think through what those structures are before you're in a circumstance where they're tested. So like, what can the organization afford in terms of things like a top-up for a sick leave? How can we support people in accessing government-type leaves and ensure that they are adequately financially sustainable for folks through things like a top-up? What is our sick leave policy and how inclusive is that? What are the things that we can reasonably offer in terms of accommodations, and are those scalable? And by thinking through those things as early as possible, and thinking through those things through the lens of what's sustainable for our organization, knowing that maybe we can add to them in the future. So like maybe our top-up is to 75% right now, but we're going to work to try to get to 80. Like, baby steps, that also just sets us up in a position where we don't run the risk of accidentally having people feel like something is favoritism or biased. So just really thinking through what can your organization do in terms of leaves, support, accommodations, protecting the privacy of that person, and ensuring that you're also aware of some of those broader structural areas where they can get support also outside of your organization. So how are you tapping into those?
Hi, thanks so much. My question, I think, is for St. John's team over here, and Homelessness St. John's, not ending St. John's. As a SPO responsible for coordinated access, consistent care, I really liked your kind of spiel at the beginning where you talked about how you're thinking about it from the systems lens. I have two questions for that. So one, how have you addressed burnout at a systems level? You're working with multiple organizations across the community, so I'm wondering what you've done to kind of do that in a consistent way. And then two, how have you, directly worked, again, in your role as a systems planning organization with organizations that maybe weren't supporting their staff in a great way? And what did those conversations look like, knowing that supported staff means better client care? Thanks.
That's me, she says. No, those are great questions, because it's hard to that second part of the question. It's hard to wade into other organizations' HR concerns and issues. So I think one of the things we've really focused on, especially this year, in the last year, 2 years really, is building a community of practice. So, things that we recognize were that not every organization has the same training budgets, the same access to supports. So how do we internalize some of that to give that back out to the community in a more sustainable way? So, we worked with our community advisory board to develop a funded position that will now create those community-wide trainings. And so that's one way at a systems level. I think the other piece too, and we mentioned this, the transition housing initiative that we took on. One of the things that our community partners immediately said was, how are you going to hire all the staff? Great question. Don't poach them from us is what they're saying, really. And so we were very intentional about a values-based hiring approach, looking at non-traditional employment pathways into the sector, recognizing people are coming in with that caring, that empathy, that desire to serve, and we could support the skill building and the upskilling through onboarding, and being very thoughtful and intentional about making sure folks, when they do leave, we celebrate the fact that they're moving on to something within community. It's always a real joy for me when people stay in community, even if we can't give them the opportunities that they're able to get. I want folks to feel celebrated in that. And so that's one way we're thinking about it at the system level. We create spaces within our coordinated access meetings for supervisors as well, to make sure the supervisors feel supported, not just frontline, but supervisors as well. And then at a CAB level, a community advisory board level, we've talked a lot about this, and we'll continue to talk about it, probably more thoughtfully and strategically, about what does a workforce strategy for our sector look like in St. John's. But that's kind of where we're at right now.
If I can also just touch on the burnout one. When we're looking at burnout, there's a few things that you can consider and levers that you can pull. So one, burnout is so much more common in organizations that are heavily mission driven. When people care deeply, we have a tendency to go above and beyond. We have a tendency to work extra hours. We have a tendency to take that mission home with us and not necessarily have that appropriate time to actually rest. So there's a few things that you can look at. One, do people have sufficient time off? So to actually be refreshed, you're looking at about like 9 consecutive days. So do we have enough time off? Are we paying enough that people can afford to take vacation, and go somewhere, get out of their environment? What does that look like? We're also looking at what degree of autonomy do people have over the work that they do. That's really difficult with frontline work, where you're inherently quite responsive to things that are happening. So how are we seeking input? How are we seeking feedback? And then how are we applying that to the work? And then we're also looking at, do people have the opportunity to see the impact of the work? Not just on a day-to-day basis, but on a longer term scale. Are we seeing that our work is impacting and reducing homelessness? And we're not always going to be able to pull levers in all 3 of those things, but it's where can we make an adjustment? Where can we support folks in one of those areas to help reduce the likelihood of burnout?
Just going to add, I'm doing our organization a disservice, but my colleague Jennifer Tipple over there, she's been the architect for a lot of that work for our organization. So if I would just have questions related to community of practice, to how do we use data to support frontline, she's the best person to talk to. Yeah.
As another point about burnout, I've done something in my leadership role really intentional. So the panel all talked about accountability. Here's accountability in practice. If someone asks you how work is going, what's your response? Busy. That's what we like to say in this sector, busy. What does that even mean, right? Like that signals pressure. I'm under pressure as a leader. And it's natural to want to say that, but I've been really intentional in my accountability. I will never say that to a staff member. And it doesn't mean that I'm not busy. And they can see it. I don't need to tell them. They know, right? But what it does is it creates this undue pressure. And then they start to think, well, how can I alleviate that busyness? And now they're taking on and taking on and taking on. And so take care of those that you are leading under your leadership. That's just one small example of something that I've been really intentional about. And the level of stress de-escalates if I'm not putting that stress on others.
Hi, I'd really appreciate your take on the open door policy and managing frontline staff and internal structures, wanting to be approachable, but also needing to time management effective and for it to be a useful time. I don't want people just coming in and chatting, and what level is it okay for them to go to, and how do we manage that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's laughing because that's an eternal struggle for me. People tend to come to my office with a cup of tea and not leave. So one concrete thing that I've done is I have a little light on my desk, and it goes from green to yellow to red. And if it's green, come in and chat. If it's yellow, I got a couple minutes for you. And if it's red, please leave me alone. But I love you, but please leave. That's kind of for me as somebody who has difficulty enforcing those boundaries, because I am just a very empathetic person. Something visual, honestly, for me, that was a bit of a game changer. But I totally respect, as somebody, if you're in a higher level of leadership, you might not be able to just rely on a little light on your desk. So I think we do have conversations with folks, from supervisor down to their staff about what it looks like to slime somebody versus what it looks like to confide in them. So chatting with folks as to, checking in to make sure that you have the time and capacity to have that conversation in that moment, and educating our entire team on what it looks like to slime somebody. So just feeling really grounded in what that means of you can't just walk into somebody's office and expect their time. And I think most people that we've worked with have really respected that. And for some, it's a bit of a learning curve, and that's when that little light comes in to help. But for me, working, from office management just up to the manager of admin and finance, I've seen a real difference in how folks approach me and value my time. So I think that that's important for your entire team to understand that, your time is valuable. It's not just management time is more valuable or ED time is more valuable. Everybody should be encouraged to enforce those boundaries. And I think the more that you are able to enforce those, the more that you respect them as well. And that's just my perspective on it, yeah.
So I work in a virtual workspace, which means that clients are all over the place. So I tend to do dedicated office hours, which I find very helpful. I would encourage that. But the other thing that I would note that I've seen as a great success for organizations, especially with frontline workers, is you are going to have some folks who are more chatty than others. Those are the folks who are going to leverage the open door policy more than others. So I would also just take a look at who the team is, who's coming to talk openly, who isn't, and then proactively schedule additional check-ins, coffee chats, so that you're building that rapport with people, so that if and when they do need to confide in you or come to you with a challenge, you have a relationship. You have that trust. Trisha taught me about the concept of scaling vulnerability. So you're being intentionally open, creating that space for vulnerability where it makes sense and where you can really support the person as a person.
Thank you. We have time for 2 more questions.
Good morning. That means I'm just in time. Absolutely fabulous presentation. The question I have is, how do we manage the risk of poaching? You said that word. We have gone in, we have the right culture, we have the capacity building, we're delivering the quality service, and then you get a 2 weeks notice. What do we do? And it is consistent. Thank you.
When you say consistent, do you mean consistent same organization?
No.
Okay.
So you would have gotten persons at a certain level. So, and when you sit and you talk with your peers, you recognize that this is happening. And so the poaching is going from usually not-for-profit to government.
So I'm going to assume that you have some great service agreements with your government partners that should cover some of it. If not, maybe revisit that one. I mean, look at what is being offered that your organization isn't, right? So you're probably looking at things like a hefty benefits package. You're probably looking at things like more clearly defined hours. There's going to be some things that are and are not feasible, right, to adopt or try to leverage or match. But if we know that folks are consistently going to other places, we're hopefully doing exit interviews, we're hoping to understand what that offer of value is, or the value proposition, what's different from what our organization can do. And then we try to see what we can do, right? Like if this is a problem, if it's happening at a consistent level or from a consistent role, is our role misaligned or misclassified? Like, are we paying under market for that position? Does that position or that role or that team not have the same opportunities for career advancement? So like, it's that understand. So like deeply audit what's happening, try to understand why, and then you have a bit of a decision, right? Of like, can we afford or justify to make whatever changes we would need to do to retain these folks? Or are we accepting that we're just building such incredible career development for folks that they're going off to somewhere else? And you kind of have to ask yourself the question for that trade-off.
Just on the topic of poaching, people have agency in their lives to do what's best for themselves, their families, and their careers. And I always say that to folks too. I think what struck me from our survey was that people felt really strongly supported. And there was a balance in the work life. Like, people weren't talking about the outcomes that they generated. They're talking about the workplace that they were valuing. And I think, like, we could have said that about any type of organization in any sector, and it might have resonated with people that everybody wants that in their work environments, or most people do, I should say. So I think, when I'm not worried about people leaving, I encourage people to leave. I mean, so like we said, that we haven't seen people leave very often, but we want to encourage people to have professional development and leadership opportunities and advancement. And that goes so far in the nonprofit sector. It's very limited. And it's something that we do as a system need to think really critically about, because we're not treating the sector equitably like government, like you said, right? So how do we advocate for those kind of resources, given that we're doing essentially what the government's responsible for?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you.
One of the last points I'll add is what's interesting with the CAH is that we're poaching the opposite way. We actually have most of our staff actually come from government, myself included. And so there is a pivot. What is causing that for us? Fair compensation. doing meaningful work, and having a good workplace culture. And those three things, we can communicate that unique propositional value to retention to the point that we have like literally 900 to 1,200 applications coming in for almost every job across the country. So it is a very highly competitive market for those reasons, because not just because we do it, people can see we're doing it, but because we can articulate what we're doing. So think about what your unique propositional value is. Why do you think people want to work for you? And say it.
Yeah, Amanda basically mentioned exactly what I was going to say, but so yes, aligned. For the smaller organizations that are maybe, you might not have the resources, right? You might not be able to do all these things. The key point is your competitive advantage. We work with many organizations that are 5 folks, can never compete at the government or the national level, but everyone has their own unique sauce. Everyone has a special sauce, and even at a 5-person organization, which we work with, you can still offer competitive pay. You can still offer, we'll chat, but you can still offer pay that's meaningful, and you can still communicate your benefits package in a competitive advantage. You know, people have agency, like you said. If people want to leave, they're going to leave. But a lot of people want to stay because they believe in the mission, as long as they feel that they're taken care of. So how are you communicating that? And what's your phased approach? I like to say, what is your crawl, walk, run? What are you doing today and next year? What's your 2-year plan? And what's your 5-year plan of getting to that place where you're holding people there? And your folks will see that. They're bought in. They have that mission. They're bought in and they're going to see it. And if you can communicate that plan for them, they'll likely stay. Of course, you know, if they're given that $200,000 pay increase, sorry, but you know, it happens, but you're creating that really compelling competitive advantage to make them double think.
All right, last question.
Great, thanks. So I appreciated both of your presentations. So this is a question for Doug and Megan. So when you were talking about, indicators, characteristics of a healthy workplace culture, one of them was an open relationship with the supervisor, and then you spoke about, there were some great quotes about people having great relationships with one another and all that. And so I was just wondering what you've learned about power dynamics. And what I've seen in different places I've worked at is that, especially in that relationship between a person and their supervisor, there can be very strong power dynamics where, you know, like the person is exerting power over. They're trying to push for something, it doesn't work. Even with coworkers, where there is, senior leadership and middle management, and just also like the intersection of homelessness work and equity work. Like this is a huge issue in the DEI space, and it's like there's research on how it impacts women of color, especially where they're considered like the problem women of color, and then they like it's so toxic they end up leaving or getting fired. So and it all comes out, it starts with power dynamics. So just curious, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I really appreciate that perspective. That definitely resonates. I think for me, in my experience at Homelessness St. John's, there was never any sort of indication to me that there was any sort of topic or anything I wanted to discuss that wasn't worth my supervisor's time. I've always been treated with a vast amount of respect, and Doug mentioned that he does servant leadership. So basically what that would look like is, just kind of being there to support your staff and however they need. And even in the first few years that we worked together, we were a really small team, but you'd see the management, there was never a job that was too small for them to do. We were all doing dishes, we were all doing frontline work when it was needed, we were all doing office coverage. So it was very much like seeing the management use their time in that way to do something that is typically understood to be sort of like a lower level type task. It really sort of showed me that all of that work is valued at every level of the organization. So when I walked into an office with my supervisor or my boss, I knew that they knew what it was like to do the work that I was doing, and they valued that that contribution that I was making. So I felt empowered to, kind of come forward with my concerns and challenge things that I felt maybe were unfair at the time. And I was always met with empathy and respect. So the power dynamic issue, I feel like it's really an issue for management and leadership. It shouldn't be on the employee to kind of, explain to management that I feel like, I'm not being held at a high enough level or as at the same level as you, as for like with respect and the worth of your work. So I think that was just a tone that we set in the very beginning, and from my experience, I think from that point onward, I never felt like anything that I was bringing to the table was problematic at the time. And maybe Doug, you can speak a bit more to like the philosophy around that type of management, because that really did work for me.
Yeah, I think using a servant leadership approach is really about equipping staff to have the resources to do the best job that they possibly can. And like I'm an executive director. I'm a very privileged person in my organization, in our community, and it's not lost on me the power dynamic that holds. And even though I don't recognize it fully from every aspect, it's always in the back of my mind. And I appreciate you raising that question, because the other thing that I think we've tried to do is create like no single points of failure on our team, right? Like, that includes me, right? So we have our senior directors involved with the board. We have Megan involved with the board. We have multiple staff cross-trained. So like we all value the work that we have to do together, and not one person's work is more important than the others. And by creating, that cross collaboration, it's a functional piece, but it's also a strategic piece, right? So that people see how hard the work can be on the other side. Now, I have no idea how to go about preparing an audit file like Megan does, but I know that it's time consuming and that there's resources that are required for that. And how do you create space for that work to get done? And just being understanding to those needs is really important. And I think when you practice servant leadership and you create accountability within those teams, you get great results and you build a ton of capacity because people feel empowered to do the work. So we were a small team early days, but we were getting shit done. And it was because I feel like they had the resources to do the work that they needed to do.
The one thing I'll add is from a practical, tactical level, your onboarding program. So something that we've designed at Bright and Early for many of our nonprofit organizations is when you're onboarding, regardless of level, so that includes your senior leadership, making sure that they're actually within their onboarding process in the front lines as well. So +1, double downing on what these folks have said, but also designing that from all of your programs and processes. So onboarding and recruitment, are your leadership team members from hiring meeting with cross-level employees? Who are they meeting with? Who are they being exposed with? Oftentimes when the executive directors are in the interview stage, they're only meeting with the board and fellow leadership. How are we involving other lines of staff involved? And when it comes to power dynamics, especially for intersectional identities, lived experience plays a huge part, and that's something that we can't control. But from a leadership angle and perspective, it is the responsibility of leadership to create that safe space. And we're doing that by creating exposure, creating access, and making sure within our processes, leadership is involved in all aspects, so you're building that trust. And the hope is that, it works.
Thank you so much.
Right. Thank you again to our panel and for your presentations. Really appreciate it.